When somebody wants to stress the simplicity of a task, they might say something like, "It's not rocket science," or "It doesn't take a brain surgeon." These are very commonly said examples, and what we're really trying to do in these examples is just call out and compare something that's so easy to something so incredibly difficult. And maybe because of those statements itself, the thought of being a rocket scientist or a brain surgeon, maybe those are some of the most respected intellectual professions today. It's so difficult to be these people. So much intelligence is required, it's sometimes unrelatable to the common person. But what if there was something that they do every day? What if there was something they do that you could do in your everyday life to help improve yourself and the lives of others? Let's dig into that thought. Let's take surgery, for example. Whether it's brain surgery or heart surgery, this is obviously incredibly complex and stressful. The stakes are high, and it is life or death. And so billions of dollars have been invested into developing equipment, drugs, and even surgical robots to help ensure the success of this profession. In all the technology and the advances in medicine, there would be one study that would be done that implemented a very interesting tool that actually cost no more than a single piece of paper. This study was done in 2008 by Dr. Atul Gawande through the World Health Organization. It was conducted through 8 different hospitals. Some of them were some of the most technologically advanced hospitals in the United States. Some of them were more rural, like in Tanzania. And in each one of these hospitals, they looked at heart surgery and how they could improve the success rate, the survival rate of heart surgery. And that piece of paper, the only thing it had on it was a 19-point checklist. They did not add even a single piece of equipment. No additional money was spent prior to the start of this study. And just using a simple checklist to remind the surgery team and the surgeon him or herself of these tasks created a decrease of 36% of major post-surgical complications in just 6 months after they implemented this checklist. Death rates decreased by 47%. 3 months later, 78% of participants in the surgery team said they'd personally seen the checklist prevent an error in the operating room. 87% said it improved patient care. Even the most intelligent people in the world know that checklists can make a difference. They can do so many things for us. They help us when our memory is bad, when we're juggling a complex situation. It helps us remember those tasks that, of course, we're smart enough to do, but can we remember it all? It also forces planning. A checklist is a plan, and that helps us go into a situation with more thought. It also makes the situation easier and less stressful. That's what a checklist does. Checklists, though, aren't beneficial only in life or death situations, like in the case of these hospitals. They can help us every day in accomplishing goals and fulfilling promises, whether that's planning a family trip, planning a volunteer project, a new workout plan, even preparing for a difficult, perhaps stressful conversation with someone. Checklists can be there for you. What is your promise, your commitment? How can a checklist help you in that complexity or planning? Here are 5 best practices for your next checklist. Number 1, keep it ordinal. The order matters. Let's take the example of being a youth coach, taking kids on an away trip. Okay, you've got a checklist going for all the different things you need to do. Packing the supplies and equipment, renting the van, getting the kids together. All of this is organized in a list, but it's not ordinal. As you're going through the trip, the kids all arrive to a location, you get in the van, you keep going, you get to the hotel, and you realize that at the bottom of your checklist, there's a line for collecting waivers. Well, at this point, what's the point of collecting waivers? The thought of a waiver is to have it before the kids go on the trip. Checklists are beneficial, but they are more beneficial when they're put in order. The order can help us perform in a way that accounts for the consequences of stages and steps. Number 2, use questions. Questions provoke thought. Don't just put line items as statements or items. Really get yourself thinking with the checklist. For example, maybe you need to pack a camera to record footage of the kids because that would make their parents really happy. We could just put camera on the checklist, but a better statement might be, is the camera and its accessories packed and charged? You see how this question begs us to think a little bit deeper. Use questions in your checklist. Number 3, divide your checklist into sections or phases. This makes it much more approachable. You see, a list can get very long and overwhelming, and the truth is, if something isn't simple and usable, then you're not going to use it. So divide it into sections. In the example of taking the kids on the tournament trip, we could separate into 4 sections. Planning, which is only really thought. This second step could be organizing, really starting to put the equipment, supplies, and tasks together. The third could be execution, fulfilling that plan, and finally follow-up, because there's always something to do after, right? Separate your long list into different sections, make it easier for yourself, make it a little bit more approachable. Number 4, leave a place for notes. Checklists should be somewhat interactive. Not only for the immediate value, maybe just a place to write a note where you've got to really act on that task right now, but also for consistent improvement. That notes section can help you improve the checklist for next time around. For example, maybe on this trip with the kids, you've got a point where you get to a restaurant and you realize that some of the kids have food allergies, and that's not something you accounted for in the beginning and thus didn't account for in your restaurant selection. That'd be a great thing to note in the notes section so that next time you can account for this thing that was unforeseen. It's hard to make improvements and act in that moment without a little section for notes. So think about that. Lastly, number 5, actually check off the checklist or strike through the line. There are countless studies that have been done about the release of dopamine in our brain when we have a moment of accomplishment. We literally have a sense of happiness, so to speak, when we've accomplished something, and why not? You've fulfilled an item, you've kept part of your promise. Get that sense of satisfaction out of that moment. Don't just use a checklist as a reference tool. Sometimes a checklist is just a reference tool, but often it will prove more value if it's physically used. At the end of the day, though, checklists, even with all these benefits, even with best practices put in place, they are still kind of boring. They are still kind of tedious. But you know what? Sometimes that's what it takes to keep a promise. Are you willing to endure the boring? Willing to endure the tedious? Are you willing to do what it takes to achieve your promise?